Freddie Mercury sold out stadiums on 6 continents. He performed for 300,000 people in Buenos Aires on a single night. He stood on the stage at Live Aid and conducted a global television audience of 1.5 billion as if the distance between himself and the camera was no distance at all. He was, for the entirety of his performing career, the person in the room that every other person in the room was watching. And there are detailed accounts from the people who were with him of evenings when Freddie Mercury sat in an audience and watched someone else perform, when he was not the watch but the watcher, when he sat where you are sitting in a seat among many seats and did what you do, listened to the music, felt the room, was moved or not moved, applauded at the end. These evenings are among the least examined moments in the history of a life that has been examined in extraordinary detail. They are worth examining, because what Freddie Mercury was when he was not performing what he heard, what he felt, what the experience of live music was for the person who understood it from the stage more completely than almost anyone else alive, is the inside of what the stage gave back to him, the performer in the audience, listening, nobody watching him. The documented instances of Freddie Mercury attending concerts as an audience member are scattered across the accounts of his life and the recollections of the people who were with him. He was a devoted music lover, not only of rock music, but of opera, of classical music, of the specific voices and performances that had shaped his own understanding of what a singer could be. He attended opera regularly, particularly in later years when his circle of musical influence and his financial ability to access any performance he wanted had both expanded. He saw Montserrat Caballé perform, and the encounter that eventually produced Barcelona began with Freddie Mercury in an audience watching Caballé on a stage and experiencing the specific quality of a voice that he described afterward as the closest thing to what he had been trying to do himself. He attended concerts in Munich during the years he spent there, the early 1980s. The period of relative freedom and anonymity in the Munich gay scene and music scene that he inhabited were scenes in which concerts and events were a regular part of the social life. He was in audiences. He sat in them. He watched and listened. The specific quality of Freddie Mercury's experience in an audience was shaped by a tension every extremely famous person navigates: the desire to have the ordinary experience and the impossibility of being fully ordinary once the fame reaches a certain scale. By the late 1970s, he could not walk into most British concert venues without being recognized. He managed this with private boxes when available, caps or altered appearance when necessary. In Munich, he had more latitude, the anonymity of a foreign city, the specific subcultures in which Queen's fame was less omnipresent. In London, the anonymity was largely gone, but the desire for the ordinary audience experience to be in a room with music and receive it rather than give it remained. He had sold out stadiums on every continent. He had been watched by more people in more rooms than almost anyone alive, and he still went to concerts and sat in the audience and tried to be the person in the seat rather than the person on the stage. He did not always succeed in being anonymous. Sometimes people recognized him and left him alone out of a specific generosity, the understanding that what he needed in that room was not to be Freddie Mercury. Sometimes he was simply not recognized. Both versions of the evening had the same quality: the performer in the audience, trying to receive what he had spent his life giving. What Freddie Mercury heard when he sat in an audience was not what the person beside him heard. It is a statement about the specific technical knowledge that 20 years of performing brings to the act of listening. He heard the technical decisions in a vocal performance, the choices about breath control, phrasing, the way a singer negotiates the transition between registers. He heard the performer-audience circuit from the outside for the first time, having understood it from the inside for 20 years. This educated listening, the listening of someone who understands the making, is a more technical and more lonely experience. The experience of someone for whom the seams of the craft are always visible. The years Freddie Mercury spent in Munich in the early 1980s were the years in which he had the greatest access to ordinary audience experience, for the simple reason that Munich provided a degree of anonymity that London did not. He was known in Munich, he was not invisible, but the specific culture of the clubs and bars he frequented was a culture in which fame was managed differently than in the British rock world. and in which the specific social norms of the gay community he was part of provided a context in which he could be present in a room without the room reorganizing itself around his presence. He went to performances in Munich. He went to clubs. He listened to music in the specific social conditions of a person who has enough anonymity to relax into the experience. Peter Freestone has described evenings in Munich in which Freddie Mercury was simply present in a room, at a bar, listening to a band play, and in which the specific quality of his presence was the quality of someone who was exactly where they wanted to be, not performing, not managing the room, simply listening. The most fully documented version of Freddie Mercury as an audience member is the opera context, and specifically the Montserrat Caballé context, which began with Freddie Mercury in an audience watching Caballé perform and experiencing the specific quality of her voice as the most overwhelming thing he had heard from the position of a listener. He had described in interviews the experience of hearing a truly great operatic voice in a concert hall, the physical quality of it, the way it fills a space in a manner that is different from anything amplified, the specific presence of a voice that is producing sound with only the human body and a room for amplification. This was the listening experience that affected Freddie Mercury most profoundly, the experience not of rock music, but of classical vocal performance, of the singers whose technique and range had defined what he understood a voice to be capable of. He went to these performances regularly. He sat in the good seats and listened with the complete attention of someone for whom this kind of listening was not entertainment but education, the continuing education of a singer who understood that there was always more to learn about what a voice could do. He sat in an audience and heard Montserrat Caballé sing, and afterward he described it as the closest thing to what he had been trying to do himself. Freddie Mercury, who had performed for 1.5 billion people at Live Aid, who had conducted 72,000 people at Wembley, who had done the vocal exercises and the call and response, and every version of the performer crowd circuit that had ever been done, sat in an opera house and heard someone do something he had been trying to do and said, "That is what I am trying to do." In an audience, as a listener, being taught. In the final years, the period between Knebworth in August 1986 and his death in November 1991, his ability to attend live performances was progressively limited by his health. The concerts he attended in this period were attended with the awareness of someone who knew the experience of being in a room with live music was among the things the future held less of. The educated listener's technical attention coexisted with the awareness of finitude, the specific quality of hearing something when you understand you will not hear it indefinitely. Every note heard more completely because the hearing is known to be limited. The specific value of the evenings when nobody noticed Freddie Mercury in an audience, or when people noticed and chose to leave him alone, is the value of any experience of ordinary humanity for someone whose public life had become extraordinary enough to make ordinary humanity difficult to access. He was not Freddie Mercury in those moments. He was a person in a seat, listening to music, moved or not moved, present in the specific way that people are present in concert halls and clubs and opera houses when they are there because they want to be there, and for no other reason. The people beside him who did not know who he was were having the same experience. He was having the same music, the same room, the same performer audience circuit, operating at whatever level it operated at in the particular room. And the people beside him who knew who he was and chose to let him have the evening were giving him a gift, the gift of the ordinary experience, briefly returned in the specific conditions of a room full of people listening to music. The reason the image of Freddie Mercury in an audience matters, the reason it is worth dwelling on, worth imagining in detail, is that it completes the picture. The extraordinary performer, whose relationship with live audiences is perhaps the most studied aspect of his career, was also an audience member. He sat where his audiences sat. He received what his audiences received. And the specific quality of his understanding of the performer-audience relationship, the thing that made his stage presence what it was, the thing that allowed him to read a crowd of 72,000 people and give it exactly what it needed, was informed, at least in part, by the experience of being in the crowd, of knowing what it felt like from the other side, of understanding the circuit from both ends, The performer who was also a listener, the listener who was also the performer who made listening feel like participation. Both at once, always. He made you feel from the stage that you were not watching but performing, that the music was yours as much as his, that the room contained something that required your presence to be complete. And part of how he knew to make you feel this way was because he had sat where you were sitting. He had been the person in the audience. He had felt what that felt like, and he had taken what it felt like and built it into every performance he ever gave. The audience in him, in everything he did on stage. The last concert Freddie Mercury attended as a spectator, the last time he sat in an audience and received music rather than giving it, is not documented with the precision that would allow a specific date or venue to be named. What is clear is that it happened, and that it happened at some point in the diminishing years when his public mobility was curtailed by his health and the increasingly private quality of his final life. And in that last audience experience, the last evening, in a room with live music from the seat of a listener, he would have heard with the complete attention of a person who understood listening from the inside out, and who understood that the experience of being in an audience was something he shared with every person who had ever sat in a room and felt the specific thing that music does when it is made live in a space with other people. He was not special in that room. He was every person who has ever been moved by a concert. He was the audience, and the audience was him. There is something specific about the gift that the concert-going audience gave Freddie Mercury on the evenings when they chose not to notice him, or the evenings when he managed to be there without being noticed. The gift was not simply privacy, though it was that. The gift was the temporary restoration of the position of listener, the position in which music is received rather than given, in which the person in the room is not responsible for the room's experience, but is simply part of it. Freddie Mercury, in those moments, was part of the audience in the most complete sense. Not a famous person in an audience, not a performer temporarily among non-performers, but simply a person present in the specific way that everyone in the room was present, receiving the same experience on equal terms. The equality of the audience, the fact that the music plays equally for everyone in the room, was the specific quality of those evenings that no stage could give him. Nobody watched him. The music played for everyone equally. He sat in his seat and listened, and was moved in the way any person is moved in a concert hall when the music is good and the room is right. He was not giving anything. He was not responsible for anything. He was the audience. And for the person who had spent 20 years being responsible for the experience of everyone in the room, who had been the one from whom everything flowed, the experience of being simply a person in a seat, one among many, receiving rather than giving, must have been among the most complete rests his life afforded him. The last concert Freddie Mercury attended as a spectator was not a Queen concert. The venue is not on record. The date is not on record. What is on record, what exists in the accounts of the people who knew him, is the picture of a man who loved music from both sides of it, who understood the audience because he had been in the audience, and who took that understanding onto every stage he ever stood on and gave it back in the form of performances that made their audiences feel that they were not merely listening, but participating in something that required them to be present and complete. He sat where you would have sat. He heard what you would have heard. He was moved the way you were moved. And then he went back to the stage and gave back everything the audience had ever given him, amplified by his specific genius into something that the audience could feel as its own. The performer as listener. The listener as performer. Nobody in the audience noticed. That was exactly the point.